Hey everyone, I'm Sabrina. If you didn't see my intro video, welcome. Thanks for tuning in. If you did see my intro video and you're coming back, thank you. As I said, my name is Sabrina. I am a registered dietitian. I also have a master's degree in nutrition. And today we're gonna be bringing a nutrition topic up. So I got some questions on my intro video of things that you guys wanted to hear about. I think one of the big ones, which is a great first thing to start with, is what should macros look like for specifically an endurance athlete. So we're gonna dive into that today. Another question I really liked was, what are common misconceptions or things that are often overlooked within the diet? I'm gonna kind of gear that towards endurance athletes as well. Then in the second half of this video, I want to talk about myself as an athlete, kind of talking about my past within triathlon. I was actually a runner first, so I'll kind of dive into how I transitioned from running into triathlon. And then I want to talk a little bit about my PRs and kind of big races that I've done, as well as talking about what my future goals are within triathlon. If you are interested in the nutrition pieces I was talking about, or kind of learning more about me as an athlete, then definitely keep watching and we'll get into it shortly. Okay, so when talking about macros or macronutrients, which if you guys are not familiar, we have three big macronutrients. Those are going to be fats, carbohydrates, and protein. These are the nutrients that are providing our body energy. When we're talking about macronutrients, a lot of people will talk about macronutrients in terms of percentages. Okay, so that's how I'm going to talk about them, talking in percentage of calories. And I think one of the big picture pieces here is that as an athlete, your macronutrients actually should not look the same every single day. They should look different based on your training, right? For example, your macros are going to look different on a rest day versus a really, long or intense kind of training day. In general, I would say your average person, right? Maybe someone that is more of a strength-based athlete or is doing kind of your average amount of exercise, which I would consider, 3 to 5 times a week for 30 to 45 minutes. That's probably pretty average for someone that works out. In that case, right, you're not necessarily doing high volume training. And so your macros are probably going to be a little less heavy in carbohydrates versus someone that is more of a true endurance athlete that is doing longer duration activities. They're going to need a little bit more of the carbohydrate source. So for kind of your general person that is just working out, not necessarily an endurance athlete like a runner or a triathlete, their splits are or should not necessarily are, but should be closer to 50% carbohydrates, 20% protein, and 30% fats. Okay, and it doesn't need to be exact, but roughly in there. What I do see a lot is it's really easy for the fat amount to be higher and the carb amount to be lower, especially if you're focusing on proteins a lot. There are a lot of proteins that also have a lot of fat in them. So sometimes people's macros in terms of the fat can actually get higher than intended because of that. When we're talking about endurance athletes, so I said before, right, our days should reflect our activity, and that's super important. So on, say, a rest day, right, your macros might look more similar to what I was just talking about versus on a really longer duration exercise day. Say, if you're a triathlete, right, this might look like a 2-3 hour ride. This might look like a 2-hour run. If you're a runner, right, it's going to be that run piece. If you're a cyclist, it's going to be, your longer rides. So when we're doing longer stuff like that, we need more carbohydrates within the diet because we're using primarily carbohydrates during, endurance type exercise. You're always using some degree of fat for energy as well, but we don't have a lot of stores of carbohydrates like we do for fat. So we need to be replenishing and replacing those. Okay, so the carbohydrate piece becomes a lot more important on those days. So your split might be, more like 55, 60, even some days 65% carbohydrates. And your fat and your protein is going to come down a little bit because of that. I would say in general, though, those days are also going to be days where your energy needs are higher. So you need more overall calories. So like protein grams and fat grams aren't going to be changing that much, but their percentages will change. And sometimes this happens too, just as a product of fueling during your workouts, right? Because we should be fueling with primarily carbohydrates. So we're adding more carbohydrates in throughout the workout. So sometimes, we intentionally want to add carbohydrates in, but the act of fueling while we're exercising is going to increase the percentage of carbohydrates from our overall calories. So when we're trying to apply this into our diet, you could calorie count, right? You could track it. You could kind of do it that way. If you know me, if you've ever worked with me as a dietitian, you probably know that I don't really love tracking and calorie counting just because it isn't always helpful. There's certain people that, it is helpful for, but for most of us, it's something that isn't always a positive thing. So I want to give you guys kind of a way to do it without tracking calories and looking at macros, okay? So a good way to look at this is thinking about your plate. So say you have, standard dinner size plate. Thinking about how that plate is split up, okay? And there's kind of three major food groups that we're going to be thinking about. So that first group is fruits and vegetables. Second group is going to be all of our protein-based foods. The third group is going to be our grains and starchy vegetables, okay? So our really high carbohydrate foods. So thinking in the context of these three major food groups on, say, a rest day, right? You're not doing any exercise, or you're doing something that's pretty low key, right? Maybe you're doing some yoga or going for a hike, going for a walk. Then your meals should be about half the plate, fruits and vegetables. And then our other two groups, so protein and then the starches, the grains and starchy vegetables, are each going to be about a fourth of your plate. So that's generally what it should look like proportionally. When we get into I would, for most triathletes or runners, right, or cyclists even, I would call this a typical training day, right? Maybe you have an hour to 2 hours of workouts total. Then we're looking at a little bit different spread, okay? We want to make sure that we're getting a little bit more carbohydrates in to fuel that workout. And we want to be careful about the amount of fruits and vegetables we're doing. We still want to have them, but we want to be a little bit more careful there because sometimes eating a lot of fruits and vegetables, it can actually prevent us from getting enough energy in throughout the day because they're so high volume, okay? So as an athlete, we want to be looking at a more of a third split. Your fruits and vegetables would be about a third of the plate, protein would be about a third of the plate, and then your starches would be about a third of the plate. And then we would look at hard training days, okay? So this is going to be a day where, maybe it's a 3-4 hour long ride, or, you're racing a half Ironman or a marathon, right? Big days like that, where we are expending a lot of energy and we're using a lot of carbohydrates. Then our plate is actually going to switch into more of the like carbohydrate heavy side. So half the plate is going to be those starches, so our grains and starchy vegetables, and then we're going to have a fourth protein and about a fourth fruits and vegetables. Just wanted to interject here and show you guys some diagrams that are called the athlete's plate, because these are really great representation and like visual representation for all my visual learners out there of what our plates should be looking like. Okay, so these diagrams are actually put together through a collaboration with the United States Olympic Committee and the University of Colorado. So they kind of split out, easy training days, those moderate training days, and hard training days. So your moderate training day, they talk about that really being your baseline where you're, eating most of the time. And that's going to be where we have that roughly third split. As you can see on this plate, right, it's not exactly a third, but I like to talk about it that way because it's just much more simplistic, right? I'm not going to look at my plate and be like, is this 25%? Is this 40%? It's more complicated than how we would, apply something into our day-to-day diet. Something else that I'd like to point out is when we get into the moderate and hard training plates, they actually have taken the fruit component of our fruit and vegetable group and taken it off the plate. And I do get why they're doing that here. I think how I would look at this is, this is what like say lunch and dinner would look like, right? We might have more vegetables there, and our fruits we might be incorporating into like breakfast and different snacks. So I think it's still definitely still important to be having fruits within the diet. They have just taken them off of the plate and put them onto the side in the moderate and hard days to kind of give the focus to vegetables. But we still want to be including fruits as part of our overall diet here. If you guys have any further questions about that, definitely let me know. But I think that, day to day is really the easiest way to be looking at it. Okay, next I want to talk about kind of some of the misconceptions or things that are overlooked this would go for a lot of people in general, but also for a lot of the athletes that I work with. So one big thing that I would say that I see a lot is this kind of intense focus on protein, right? I think there's a lot of messaging out there right now that we need protein and we need it in, every shape and way. And yes, protein is super important, especially as an athlete. It's very important for muscle repair, muscle recovery, and, gaining strength within our muscle, because it's really the building block that's coming in and building our muscles back up. So yes, protein is super important. However, I think sometimes it gets a little exaggerated, right? Like, for example, I'll have a lot of people that are coming in to see me to talk about nutrition, and they'll be eating a perfectly good amount of protein. They'll be like, I'm not getting enough protein. I know that. I'm like, you're fine. So I think that is a pretty big misconception. There's a lot of recommendations out there that are, in terms of like daily protein needs, the recommendations are much higher than what is really backed by science. Okay, so yes, we do want good amount of protein within our diet, but we don't want everything to be protein. Because what happens is if we're focusing so much on protein, then we start missing out on our carbohydrates, our fats, but also, our micronutrients too, which is not necessarily something that we want, right? We have to have that balance within our overall diet. The next misconception that I hear a lot is that you should be watching the amount of carbohydrates you're eating, or a common thing is like thinking that carbohydrates cause weight gain. And that is so not true. Carbohydrates, just like fats, just like proteins, are an essential macronutrient. So we do need them. They are our body's primary and preferred fuel source. And that's true for exercise, right? But that's also true for just day-to-day living too. So we want to make sure that we are getting a good amount of carbohydrates in our diet. They do not cause weight gain. I think sometimes they get associated with weight gain because higher calorie foods may also be higher in carbohydrates, but it's not the carbohydrates, right, that are the problem. Going along with the protein, I think the big thing here is that all of our major food groups, all of our food groups matter, and they all have a place within our diet. And, there isn't one food group that you should be trying to have, so much of. It's more about the balance piece and having, a little bit of everything. This next thing that I want to talk about is probably the number one thing that I feel like, people in general, but also athletes overlook within the diet, and that is actually dairy products. Okay, so I feel like it's, somewhat kind of common nowadays to be like, I'm gonna go dairy free, right? Or like, I'm gonna try to decrease dairy in my diet for whatever reason. But the truth is that dairy products are a kind of crucial component of our diet. And if you aren't able to eat dairy products, or if you're not eating dairy products for some reason, then you need to be looking at how to get the nutrients that we typically get from dairy products in a different way. And those two nutrients are calcium and vitamin D. Okay, so vitamin D, we have very few food sources that are a good source of vitamin D. So I generally don't even talk about like the food sources because they're just not great sources. We do fortify dairy products though. Most people get their vitamin D from fortified dairy products. There are a lot of dairy alternatives out there nowadays that are also fortified in vitamin D. The other kind of like natural way, I guess you can say, that we get vitamin D is from sunlight. So sun actually hitting our skin helps with or promotes the conversion in our body for our body to make vitamin D. However, a lot of people, especially within like the northern half of the US, or people that just live more north, we're not getting the right like intensity or like type of sunlight to be making vitamin D, right? You really need a lot of like skin exposure at more of the like hot parts of the day, which most of us are covering up and wearing sunscreen, right? Because we don't want skin cancer, and you should do that. But it does also mean that we're not getting a lot of vitamin D from that sunlight exposure. So it is important to get it through our diet. Okay. And then calcium is somewhat similar in that dairy products are the highest and best sources of calcium in the diet. There are a lot of other sources of calcium, but they tend to just be lower in the amount of calcium that's in them. So for example, I think spinach only has like 25 milligrams of calcium per cup, and the like recommended daily intake for calcium is, for adults is about 1,000 to 1,200 milligrams a day. So that's a lot of cups of spinach, and you're not going to get your calcium needs met through eating, leafy greens. So I think that's a huge misconception. Like, people think that they can get their calcium through, just like vegetables, but it's actually really hard to. So having something that is, naturally high in calcium, like our dairy products, or something that is fortified. So a lot of dairy alternatives nowadays are also fortified in calcium, but it's really important to check your products and make sure that they are, so that you are getting those nutrients. The other thing I'll say is a lot of multivitamins do not have calcium in them. And that is because it's actually very hard to put calcium in multivitamins because it's a very like large mineral. So you won't see a lot of calcium in your supplements or your like multivitamin. Vitamin D, sometimes you will. So if you're taking a multivitamin, definitely check it out, see what is in yours. Yeah, so overall, dairy products are, something that you want to be having in your diet regularly. And if you're not, then you do need to look for a way to still get your vitamin D and calcium elsewhere in the diet. And that sums it up for the nutrition topics that I wanted to talk about today. Next, I want to jump into what my kind of journey into triathlon has looked like, and I'll talk about some of my PRs and where we're going from here. So I actually started out as a runner, as I mentioned previously. So I started running my junior year of high school. Basically, I was pretty bad at all like hand-eye coordination sports. That's definitely something I joke about now. Like, there's a reason I'm a runner. So my freshman year of high school, I played soccer, was not very good. Sophomore year, I didn't do any sports. And then junior year, I actually decided to join the cross-country team. Basically, my homeroom teacher, she was a coach, and she kind of was like recruiting for cross-country. She was like, you don't need to be fast. You don't have to have any running experience. Like, anyone can do it. And I was like, I don't know. But I gave it a shot, and yeah, I was really slow at first, and I was not fast, and I was left behind on every single run all summer. But it was, something that I actually found that I did enjoy, and I saw a lot of progress very fast in those beginning years because I was new at it. So I did cross country, and then I ran distance track in the spring, and then I did the same thing for senior year. Again, wasn't super great in high school, like was on JV most of the time, ran a little bit on varsity for track. Yeah, that's kind of where I started out. And then I went to college. I went to the University of Wisconsin, Madison. So it is a D1 school. So I, again, was not a good runner in high school. So I was not running for my school, did not have a chance to do that. But I did end up joining, in my sophomore year, I ended up joining the UW track club, which is a pretty, I would say, call it a competitive club. We would do a lot of like meets against other D1 clubs, or sometimes we'd also get to race against like D2, D3 schools. So that was a really fun experience. Definitely got a little faster at that point. And then my junior year of college, I actually decided to kind of just jump in and try triathlon, which basically was a decision made out of the fact that I was getting injured a lot when I was just solely running, which I think is, looking back, is probably a product of like poor mechanics and not doing the right type of strength training. But anyway, it's, what kind of promoted me to try triathlon. And I would say, from an injury prevention standpoint, like the 3 different disciplines of triathlon really helps prevent injuries. There's not as much like high impact all the time like there is in running. So that's really what initially kind of drove me towards triathlon. So my junior year, I switched over to the UW triathlon team, which is more of like a club sport, and it still is today at this point. Hopefully it will become an NCAA sport at Madison at some point. I kind of knew how to swim going in, not well, but I knew how to like do the strokes and like breathe. It just wasn't super coordinated. So there was definitely a big learning curve with swimming. As biking, there was also a really big learning curve. Like I remember I didn't know like why you shift, what shifting was for. Like I was like, just go in the biggest gear and smash it out. Yeah, didn't know what gears were when I first started biking. but we learned. So that was, what year was that? 2018? I think summer of 2018, I did my first triathlon, which was just like a local sprint race. I actually placed a second in the like novice category. So I think that like really gave me the triathlon bug, because I was like, oh, this is fun and I'm like not horrible at it. So yeah, that was like, you know, kind of the tipping point, and I just never looked back. Now I would say I'm more focused on like a 70.3 type distance, but I will still race a lot of like sprints and Olympics leading up to that. I don't know if I'll do a 70.3 this year just because of, I'll talk about it later, but like my focus for the year. Talking about PRs, or for those of you that aren't familiar with the term, personal records, which is basically, you know, your best time that you've run. So I think that my 5K PRs, they're a really good example of kind of the progress that I've made as an athlete over, you know, I don't know, past 10 years. So I had to look some of these up. I do not have these memorized, but back in 2015, so this was my senior year high school PR, for the 5K was 23:36. So, you know, not horrible, but also, you know, not great. I wasn't smashing any records. In 2019, which was kind of the year coming off of being part of track club, I PR'd again, and that was 22:19. And then actually just this past year, so February, I guess it was about a year ago now, February of 2023, I had another PR, which was 22:07. And I feel like that one's really notable because it was actually the beginning of the season for me, and I hadn't done any speed work, and I actually had no idea what pace I was going to run for that race. I really haven't raced a 10K since college, but my current 10K PR is from 2018, and that was 45:47. So that's the last 10K I've raced. For triathlon, so sprints are kind of hard to like say a PR, because at least the ones that I've done, like they all tend to just be slightly different distances. Like sometimes the swim is 400 yards and then sometimes it's 750, right? Or the bike is always like a little different. So it's kind of hard to say a PR, but generally for a sprint around like 115 to 120, somewhere in there, just depending on the distance. My Olympic PRs, so I think the first Olympic I ever did was in 2019, and I actually couldn't find the results for some reason. They said they're going to be uploaded soon. I don't know. But I think it was around 3 hours. I don't remember exactly. And then I did another one in 2019, which was 2:52. In 2020, I brought that down quite a bit. So that one was 2:39. This past year, so June of 2023, I had the tiniest little PR. It was 2:39:18. However, it was not a good race. My bike was like awful because I basically hadn't ridden my triathlon bike since like the previous year, and it was like beginning of the season, first race of the year, and I think the seat height was just like slightly off, and my hamstrings were just caked, like they were cramping, and I like literally didn't think I could start the run, but once I started running it like shook out and it was fine. But the bike was definitely not good, so I don't think that's a true representation of where I was from a fitness standpoint. But yeah, I'll definitely be doing an Olympic this year, so I'll get a kind of better picture of where I am at from that perspective. And then that brings us to 70.3s. So this is half Ironman distance. So I did my first half Ironman, which was Wisconsin over in Madison, and I raced that in 5:45:11. So first half Ironman, I was pretty happy with that. That actually did qualify me for the 70.3 World Championships, which I got to go do in 2022. However, in the meantime, I broke my collarbone in a bike race. It was a crit, if you know what that is. And so I broke that end of May, and it was a very bad break. I actually completely broke the bone. The one half came out of my skin, and I had to get emergency surgery in rural Iowa. So it was a long recovery process. Like, the muscles in my shoulder all atrophied while I was in the sling. I think there was just like a lot of inflammation, and like my bone came out of the skin. So obviously things really got disrupted. And when I started PT, like, couldn't lift my arm at all. So it was like months of recovery and months before I could even swim. So the 70.3 World Championships that year were in St. George, Utah, in October, and I was only able to swim like 2 weeks before the race, and I wasn't actually even cleared to swim from my PT, but I did because I was like, I have 2 weeks, I need to. So yeah, that was not the best race of my life, but I still went and had a good experience. So that one was 6:11:17, and if you know that course, it's super, super hilly as well. And I mean, I essentially just like did a run walk of the entire run because I just didn't have the training for it. I mean, even running, I think I had only been running for like 3 months beforehand because I couldn't swing my arm. It was too painful. So yeah, that was just kind of a fun one. And then this past year in 2023, so this would have been September, I did the Madison half Ironman again, which was actually completely a different course than from when I did it in 2021. But that time was 5:31:28. So essentially cut off about 15 minutes. Notable things about that race was I actually got a flat on the bike, and I did change my tire all by myself. So I don't know how long it took, but obviously that was in there. And then there's like this part on the bike course where there's basically like a drain. It's kind of like a gap like that of a gutter almost, and it like dips down really far, and you come down a big hill and like hit it at the bottom, and I was still in my aero bars when I hit it, and it snapped my neck back. So that came back to haunt me on the run as well, and my back was just in like a world of pain. So yeah, I would say that race was a learning experience race, and I was just like super happy to have a PR, but it definitely could have gone a lot better. So yeah, I think, all in all, like, my fitness has been improving a lot over the past few years, and I think there's still a lot of room to continue improving. So next, I want to talk about future. So as I mentioned in my intro video, I do have a pretty big ambitious goal of eventually going professional in triathlon. So you've kind of just heard all my PRs. Like, you're probably, if you have ran races or like done triathlons, you probably know like those aren't impressive times, right? Like, I would call myself like fairly average, maybe like more of a top of the end age grouper within triathlon. But I think, I think there is room to grow, and over the next few years, I could get there if I'm willing to put the work in, which I think I am. I also feel like there's been a lot of, especially like females, that have kind of gone from where I am right now into the professional field, right? That I've like watched over the past few years. And so that's really inspirational too, right? Like, it shows you like, if you put the work in, like, you can get there too. So, currently anyway, I believe in myself. I think within, I would say like I'm probably going to need at least 2 years to really like progress there. But, 2 to 4 years trying to get my pro card within the next 2 to 4 years, I think is pretty realistic. So this year specifically, I am really just focusing on continuing to develop and, basically like building fitness. So I don't have any like big, what you might call like an A race. I'm more so just focusing on the training, having fun, keeping the love for triathlon, and racing a little bit more. So doing more like short course stuff, sprints and Olympics. I'm gonna do a 5K, try to get a new PR, gonna do a 10K, try to get a new PR. I might do some like trail races just for fun, running trail races for fun. So yeah, this year is more about a year of like fun. I'm also getting married this year, so it's a good year to just be a little more relaxed. And then next year I'll probably have something like more of a big race to do. All right, well, that is it for this video. I hope you guys learned something today, or at least found something interesting that I talked about today. If you did like this video, please like and subscribe to my channel. Also, in the comments, let me know what other nutrition topics you want to hear about, or if there's anything on the triathlon side that you want to hear about as well, please let me know. Otherwise, yeah, like and subscribe for more.